Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show. And we're happy to have with us this morning JoDee Neil. Welcome to the show, JoDee.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So, JoDee spent 20 years prosecuting the worst crimes against children, helped recover nearly $3 billion for Texas counties in the opioid epidemic, moved to Singapore to fight child trafficking with Interpol, and then came home, became a survivor who finally told her own story and wrote the book on it. JoDee, you describe yourself as someone who knew at age 5 she'd be a courtroom lawyer. Walk me back to your dad's office in Dallas, and what did you see there that made you so certain?
What a great question. Thank you so much, Mr. Myers, for having me. I saw people suffering, and I can't remember a time in my life where I haven't laid awake at night and really contemplated the suffering of the human condition. And I knew that I wanted to help people. And I saw my dad helping people. He practiced criminal defense and family law. And I didn't necessarily want his law practice or his practice area, but I admired the way I could tell it helped him to help other people. And I wanted the same response from people from helping them.
So you were the youngest prosecutor, let me see if I got this right, ever assigned to Crimes Against Children Division in Collin County. What was it like to be 27 years old in that room?
As far as I'm aware, and it was pretty rough. It was far more than I was equipped to handle. But I was also young and had a lot to prove, and I was never going to admit defeat. I was not going to turn down the assignment or request a transfer. So I had one choice, and that was to figure it out.
So is your primary area of practice, I went on your website, is still working with child issues. Is that correct?
Survivors and children who are survivors, yes.
So I'm going to ask you questions that pertain to that, and we're going to go all over the place. But if a child just told me something happened to them, what do I do in the next 24 hours?
Absolutely. You contact the state reporting agency in the place where you live. In Texas, we have the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. If it's a acute, meaning the child is still in danger with the same perpetrator, call the hotline. If it's something that sounds like, maybe it was a counselor at a camp this past summer, then you can make a website report.
So I'm terrified that my kid won't be believed. How does a child credibility actually get established in a legal setting?
That is a really prescient question, because the fact of the matter is that the perpetrators control the evidence that they leave behind. And the perpetrators generally don't do crimes on video. And so we, as listeners, as jurors, as people evaluating the factual allegations from the child, have to use our best judgment and our intuition. We have to listen to what the child says, what the child doesn't say, and look at how they say it. The way that the outcry takes place is very important to evaluating crimes against children issues.
So what's the difference between reporting to CPS and then going to local law enforcement? And when do you choose one versus the other?
They're basically the same. If it's a child abuse case, then the report should go, even if you report to CPS, it should also go to law enforcement. I would say it's really best to call CPS, to call the hotline first, especially if you live in Texas. Hopefully, every state in the country has this hotline. And CPS is going to route it to law enforcement. If you have any doubts, if you have maybe a bad experience with CPS and you're concerned, call law enforcement too and tell them that you've contacted CPS, because I'll tell you, the right hand doesn't always know what the left hand is doing.
Hmm. So the person who hurt my child is a family member. Um, does going legal mean blowing up my entire family?
Possibly. Possibly.
And I don't know, even that's probably not even a legitimate question. It doesn't really matter, does it?
It's a legitimate question. Those dynamics are what has suppressed many legitimate outcries over the years. And I'm constantly contacted by adults who say that they told a parent or a grandparent, and that person chose the family rather than believing their child. And my hope and prayer for humanity is that we're getting to the point where we understand that if you don't protect the child, you're dooming your family lineage.
So my child's acting totally normal and won't talk about it anymore. Does this mean I imagined it?
No, it means that the child is dealing with a lot of trauma from the event. The child is in survival mode, doing their best to go through the day, probably attending school, doing their sports, their activities, while really struggling with the reality of what's happened to them.
So how do predators get children to stay quiet? So like, what does grooming actually look like, before the abuse actually starts?
I would say that grooming is exploiting the vulnerability and cultivating a relationship with the child in advance of the abuse event. Uh, the grooming is part of what keeps the child silent because the child likes this person. Oftentimes, the person's been nice to them, maybe bought them something that they wanted, maybe shown affection, concern, care. And that child doesn't want to get them in trouble. Also, a lot of times the child does not know that what is happening to them is wrong. Perpetrators operate under they they don't play by normal rules in the way that they commit crimes. They use love, they weaponize kindness to effectuate their plan. And that is far too much for a child to navigate.
So, what's the statute of limitations for child sexual abuse in Texas? Is it ever too late for an adult survivor, to take action?
For criminal cases, there's not one. For civil cases, it's 30 years. And I don't think it's too late generally. Look, the reality that I'm struggling with the justice system, and that's why I've had to shift my entire practice to more of a consulting model, is that the system, we cannot really rely on the system to fulfill our sense of justice. Sometimes it works out, but we have got to figure out a way to be witnessed and to say the truth about what's happened to us in a way that helps us heal so that the perpetrator does not continue to have control over our lives and basically destroy our lives. So, yes, you can tell law enforcement, but what law enforcement does cannot be the basis of your healing. Otherwise, you're just giving your power away, not only to the perpetrator who has already taken it, but to a system that is ill equipped largely to handle most cases.
So I'm going to ask you, this is kind of a tougher question to answer in a definitive way. So, but walk me through what actually happens from first disclosure all the way to the courtroom. I know there's not one answer there, but maybe if you can kind of give me a general idea of what a family, might face in that kind of scenario.
We are lucky in the year 2026 that we've had about 30 years of training for certain specialized law enforcement personnel and for places like the Children's Advocacy Center to develop and fine tune protocols in areas where there are these places. In the best practices for child protection, a child will make an outcry, a lot of times to another child who will then tell a teacher or an adult, and that person will call CPS as you've asked earlier, and that initiates the Crimes Against Children protocol. What the best practice is for a child to not be interviewed at a police station by a well-meaning but burly beat cop, but to go to a children's advocacy center and to be interviewed in a video recorded, legally defensible, open-ended, non-leading question, blind interview. It takes place in a room with very few distractions. They're short, they're 30 to 45 minutes, and generally it's a young female interviewer who gets the who, what, where, and why to the best of the child's developmental abilities. At the time that interview is taking place, best practices have a specialized detective and a specialized CPS worker watching the interview. And that's where they direct their investigation after that to follow up for witness statements, possible DNA, possible, teacher statements, any sort of ring camera evidence, whatever leads need to be run down that can be within reason should be done at that time. And then the case is basically the best practice is to be discussed with the district attorney who's also specialized in these cases. That would be someone like I was. And then we can say, hey, what about this, this, and that at the investigative stage? And they can go and work on the next few things that we want them to do. Then the case is packaged up, brought to the district attorney's office, and then that prosecutor does vertical prosecution. So that prosecutor meets with the child in advance of grand jury, vets any potential defenses. The defendants love perpetrator propaganda, as I like to call it, coaching, people making up a lie to get someone in trouble, as though anyone wants to be involved with the police or prosecutors. But and then it goes to the grand jury who makes a decision about whether or not to indict the perpetrator. And then it goes through the criminal court system, which can take a while. It can take years. Hopefully the child is in counseling during that time. And then we get ready for jury trial, which hopefully is not a traumatic experience. I did everything within my power to make it a healing experience, but I have not yet figured out how to clone myself.
Yeah, that was my next question. So how do you figure out how to not re-traumatize a child in that whole process?
That is an art form. We just had Mother's Day. I would say bringing the level of concern for any child equal to what you would bring for your own child. You want to make sure that they're comfortable in the courtroom, doing processes like kids in court in advance of trial, bringing a whole bunch of kids, all the survivors, all the victims and their families to court, and kind of a show and tell. A lot of times the judges will volunteer to participate and the bailiff will come, and it's a really helpful experience for the kids so that there are fewer fears of the unknown. Fear of the unknown is a major issue for all survivors, not just children. And so you want to make sure that they feel comfortable in the place where they're going to be describing the truth about what's happened to them. I like testifying in person. I do not like closed circuit testimony, which is what is available as an option in Texas. I think it's important for everyone, because these are very serious crimes, to personally witness the child's demeanor while they're testifying. And I do think it's important for the child to take their power back and to say the truth about what's happened to them in front of the person who hurt them. And
So do you
so
think that some of that, you said take the power back, and that just clicked in my mind. Do you think that can have maybe a healing effect?
absolutely. I think that is probably the greatest healing property of the jury trial process, is because no longer does this perpetrator have the power over the child or the survivor. They're not staying silent. They're doing the bravest thing, in my opinion, the bravest thing a human being can do, that not even I've been brave enough to do, which is say the truth about what happened to them in front of the person who did it.
So if you have a child on the stand, and because of our unique system of justice, I mean, unique in the world, in that you have the ability to face your accuser and ask them about that. That's where kind of the rub comes in. Or how do you manage that? You have a cross exam of a child over a traumatic event, questioning whether they're honest, and how does that all work? I mean, I just can't even imagine. I have 4 kids and grandkids, and just the idea just makes me sick.
It is sickening. It is sickening, and I feel that we're really at a inflection point with the Constitution as it's written, which was never written for women who couldn't vote or children who were simply viewed as property in the year it was written. The children do not enjoy the presumption of innocence or the right not to testify like the defendant does. And we often have to rely on the good graces, the sort of unspoken dignity of defense counsel, which may or may not be there. I recently sat in on a jury trial where defense counsel just really didn't treat the child as you would hope or expect. And it's a line that I don't know if they should really have to walk. We need to fix the system, because bringing a child into court and having no protections for them when they take the stand, even though it is, I mean, who's more truthful among us than a child?
Hmm.
And they get no credit for that. There's the presumption of lie. And all survivors face that, and children are no different.
So, civil versus criminal. Can you actually sue the person who did this if you don't have a conviction?
You can. Whether that is a fruitful endeavor that is worth continued effort and probably having to pay a civil attorney is a different issue. Right
Mhm.
now, there are very few remedies. There just aren't that many ways for the lawyers to make it worth their while. We'll put it that way. Contingency fee lawyers will take the case if the defendant has pockets or if there's an insurance policy, but very few survivors can pay a lawyer, and even a reasonable hourly rate, to do a civil lawsuit. And that's another thing that bears some revisiting in our system.
So, what makes institutions like daycares, churches, schools legally liable for what an employee does to a child? If they've taken all the potential safeguards that they feel like they can, and they're, doing, their due diligence and trying to protect the children in their care, but then they have an employee, how does that relationship work?
Well, you already raised two major issues that I see very commonly are not done.
Mm-hmm.
Taking all the steps they can take.
Mm-hmm.
I have expanded my law practice to consulting because I'm finding they're not taking all the protections they can take, not even down to basic training on reporting to CPS and law enforcement. I mean, it's a 1 hour training I put together so that churches, schools, daycares can understand, oh, I'm not the sole arbiter of these facts. I have one job, and that is to report this issue to law enforcement. And so I think that's a major sticking point for a lot of businesses. And in terms of due diligence of the perpetrator and the perpetrator status, that's something we need to revisit, because I'm seeing constantly in Texas schools, when the perpetrator is given an option to resign or just to be terminated, but there's no criminal report made that results in an
Mm-hmm.
arrest, then that perpetrator still has a clean background. And so a perpetrator, and I've seen this, can do district to district to district to district without ever coming up on the radar. So you can do background checks all day, but if there's no arrest that comes up on the, you know, worldwide background check web, I say that because law enforcement has much better tools than the private sector, but they leak a little bit out to the private sector using special tools that you have to pay to access. So it may or may not. It may or may not come up with something. And then you have to look, a lot of times suit has to be filed to figure out, how much did this business, school, institution know? Have there been reports of this nature that they have suppressed? Because then we're looking at systemic failure with a pattern and practice of cover up.
So here's an interesting thought that I had, or it's interesting to me. So, someone I can, so I left the Catholic Church some number of, maybe a decade or more ago, because of this very thing. I just couldn't stomach the idea of my church going from, taking these priests that were violating, human decency and transferring them from one place to another place to another. So if you have an individual who does this and maybe does get reported, but or somebody says something and then he goes somewhere else, you don't you have a legal culpability if you kind of go by an accusation as opposed to an actual conviction or something that's really documented? Or when they go to the next place and they get hired there or interviewed there, if you tell them about this alleged incident that occurred, how do the protections happen there?
What you're asking is, does one subsidiary of an institution have a duty to the larger organization to follow through? Is that what I'm understanding?
To report something which is just an allegation to another so in other words, there's no conviction, there's no proof, this is an allegation and it's going to follow this person. Do they have a duty to report that allegation?
They do have a duty to report it to law enforcement. If it's a child, if it's an adult, I still think they have a duty to report if it's a crime. Now, if they're smart, they will continue to utilize their resources to continue to report. I mean, the failure to do so is what creates liability. And that's what we've seen in the Boy Scouts case, for example. I was contacted by survivor group for the Boy Scouts. And
I know the attorney who prosecuted that.
well, now it's in bankruptcy, right? And I think one of the reasons why they filed for bankruptcy is because there were internal documents that showed that there were reports, there were children who made outcry and adults around them who believed them, who told the institution about what they knew. And the institution just moved the perpetrator to another post. And it's the discovery of that sort of irresponsible corporate conduct that creates financial liability for institutions. And so it's important to distinguish between the civil liability, which would be under, premises liability, negligent hiring, negligence, under the civil tort remedies versus the criminal. And God help us if they're reporting to law enforcement and law enforcement's not doing anything, which has also happened.
So I'm going to put this just a little bit sharper point, and that is, so let's say I'm a perpetrator, and then I get reported to law enforcement, but then I just quit that job and I go to another place. I'm not convicted; it's just an accusation, and I'm going to another place where I'm going to be around children. Does the company have a potential liability if they report that to the next company? I mean, they report it to police, but then the company calls up and says, "Hey, Joe Smith is applying over here. What can you tell us about him?" And then there's all these employment laws. This is kind of, can they tell the other company, well, there is this accusation, because it is an accusation, allegation.
Yes. I don't, an allegation to me is that's what there is. I mean, if someone has, for example, verbally sexually harassed female employees in the workplace, yes, then the employer reserves the right to tell the truth about this person. I mean, what are they going to do? Sue the former employer for defamation or for tortious interference? Okay, well, the defense to that is you were sexually harassing all these women here. So you want to have that fight? Let's go.
So they open themselves up if they were to do that. That was my question, is how you do that. So let's talk about your book. Tell me about your book.
Thank you.
What's
Thank
the
you so
name
much.
of your book?
My book is called Outcry Witness. It's a former prosecutor's guide to healing and justice after sexual violence. And it is the culmination of everything I have learned and experienced throughout my life.
So tell me, what is the primary message in the book, and what can somebody who's interested, what would they take away after reading the book?
The primary message of this book is you can heal. You don't have to stay frozen just surviving the rest of your life. And that's what survivors do. The latest CDC data says 45% of all American women have survived contact sexual violence, and 1 in 6 men. And then there's the data set of the 1 in 4 little girls who will be sexually abused before they turn 18. So the prevalence is mind blowing, mind blowing. And if you think about that many people, 57,748,000 of the 45%, that's 45% of American women who have survived contact sexual violence, just surviving and not being able to heal, then you see why maybe we're struggling with so many issues in our society, because you have these people who are not really living full lives because of what someone else did to them. And so I am getting the message out that you can heal. You don't have to stay frozen. And it starts with saying the truth about what's happened to you in the presence of a competent witness.
So let's say you're an adult. I mean, anybody who's, I think every adult knows somebody who's had this happen to them. But let's say you're an adult and it happened, 30, 40 years ago, and it just exists. So what sort of mechanisms are in your book to help someone who's in that sort of situation?
What you just described is so common. And in that situation, I would talk to a survivor and I would say, look, you did not come this far to hand your power over to the legal system, which is basically decrepit, if you ask me. You have so much time left on this planet. You don't know. Is it worth it to you to be free of this weight? And they always say yes. And then we say, okay, how have you been feeling for the 30 to 40 years that you have carried this secret inside of you? They're going to say angry, nervous, depressed, feeling a loss of purpose, frozen. And so my book meets them where they are at being frozen. And it's baby steps to get out of this state that I believed was a choice unique to me, but I know now from taking Bessel van der Kolk's courses in trauma studies that it's an actual physiological response to surviving sexual trauma and lots of other kinds of trauma, that basically you just lock up and you put the memories in a box in the back of your head or file cabinet, you lock it up, but you can pull it out. And it's the fear of doing that keeps people frozen. But what I am creating through this book is step-by-step, baby steps, I think I just said that, so that you can see that what's on the other side is worth pushing through the fear of disclosure.
So, some I know some women. You said 1 in 6 men. I don't know any men, but men are not likely to talk about much of anything.
Maybe this is why. Maybe they're frozen. I never thought about that.
So if you have my mind drifted there. So for just a second. So if you have a woman who has undergone this and she's locked this away in her mind, and that's her mechanism to deal with the whole situation, what's wrong with that? Why is that not a good thing?
I love that you asked that. Well, I mean, I guess, okay, so I was on the radio with a man named Dan Ronan, and he said he was actually abused in the Catholic Church, and he shared his story on NPR, and he said it's like trying to keep an inflated beach ball under the water. And you use all your strength and all your might to keep this beach ball underwater. But at some point, you're going to tire out, and the beach ball is going to head up and break the water plane. And that's exactly what it is. And what I have seen time and time again is that so many addiction issues, relationship problems, despair are all coming from the source, from this void inside of us, the beach ball.
So you've said you've changed your practice to more of a consulting practice. Explain what that means.
Well, I am very well equipped, having practiced in both the civil sector and the criminal sector, to talk to survivors as a lawyer and as a survivor myself in a way that they're not going to be able to find in their, usual therapist. I'm able to get to the point. I'm able to see the situation from a larger lens. I know the answers to a lot of questions. I can advise on how to heal without necessarily having to go through the criminal or civil system. If there's a case, obviously, I will consider that or maybe refer them to another lawyer. But I am able to offer a lot of perspective and concrete steps for healing that have worked for me and that I've seen work for other survivors. On the business end, I am able to design programs for businesses so that they can comply with their legal obligations and avoid liability, which isn't just to protect the business, though certainly that's important, but it's also to ensure that they treat their employees with a more humane level of care. And what I find in the employment cases that come in front of me and that I've handled in the past is that it's the retaliation that employees experience once they've made a disclosure of some sort of inappropriate conduct. And everyone else just gangs up on them. And that's what ends up costing the company a lot of money in lawsuit settlements. And even in a place like
Mhm.
Texas, which is not a plaintiff's friendly jurisdiction, retaliation after the sexual abuse disclosure is what costs corporations millions. And so I am putting together trainings and processes for any size business so that they can mitigate the risk to themselves and treat their employees with more dignity.
So how do you market that to these businesses?
Well, they're trying to get me to do Google Ads, and thankfully I live in Dallas, so there's a lot of businesses nearby. I market it. I'm in a network called Vistage International, and so I market it inside the Vistage group. I market it through conversations like this. Hey, do you know
Mhm.
anyone who owns a business who would like to implement Outcry Witness for businesses, or humanity for workplaces is what I call the larger training module. And I can go in and I can do a listening tour. I can assess what I think your business needs. How thankfully as a lawyer, I would have some confidentiality. How many sexual harassment reports do you get a year? How it's all this the same five perpetrators? Okay, well, maybe we need to have a different conversation. And in the meantime, we need to train everybody.
So are you saying this from experience? Because that sounds crazy.
Oh no, this is very real. This is very real. It's
So
not
I do know
crazy.
another attorney who does nothing but sexual harassment lawsuits, and the repercussions. I mean that the um, people or businesses coming after the people who register the complaint. That's apparently very common.
Very common. And the defense, I see it in criminal cases and in civil cases. The defense just locks down in this very archaic posture, which is immediately DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim offender. So it's like, hold on, take a deep breath. Do we have a problem here? Okay. If so, how can we handle this in a way that's maybe not going to cost us $15 million at a jury trial? Okay. Come here. Tell us what happened. Okay. Okay. Do you know if this has happened to anyone else here in the workplace? All right. We got to deal with that guy. Let's deal with that guy. And let's handle this with care and with dignity. And far too often I'm seeing the wrong person fired. I'm seeing the wrong person chased out or retaliated against. It's really the person creating liability and using the workplace as his personal hunting ground that needs to be let go.
Mhm. So that's sometimes tough because you have someone who is who is generating. So I'm going to just, I'm not going to say something that I agree with. I'm just going to say factually, and you're probably going to nod your head. You have someone who is generating income for a corporation. They're a key person in this corporation, a company, even a law firm. And they are a key person who generates income. And then you have someone underneath who is not in a position of responsibility, but gets victimized. And then they don't want to get rid of the person who is responsible for so much of their income at the company. And it's easier to just get rid of the person who was actually victimized. Do you want to comment on that?
Oh, of course. What you have described that's exactly the defense lockdown that I was describing earlier. That happens far too often than not. And it also explains why there's so little mobility for female employees in leadership, right? Because the ones bringing in income are generally partner level, director level, and they're using the workplace to hunt for targets. Look, it's not always easy to do the right thing, is it? It requires some courage. And I see this where it comes to believing children, to believing survivors. It does take someone standing up for something that's difficult, but it's worth it. It's worth it for a lot of reasons. Because one, do you want to be complicit to someone else's nastiness? No. Just clear the funk and do the right thing and trust that the person, look, saying the truth about what happened to you is the hardest thing that a person can do. I mean, it's not going to war. I mean, maybe that's harder on a different level, but this is really, really hard. And the bias that people make this up to get something from it is very flawed because it's swimming upstream, to put it nicely. And if someone's saying that something happened to them, that needs to be taken very seriously and be given all the reverence that it deserves.
So, so if someone's listening to this and they want to know more information about JoDee Neil and Neil Now Legal, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, I have websites, jodieneil.com and neilnowlegal.com. It is pretty easy to find me on the World Wide Web and on the AI even. I'm coming up. I have a contact form and I'm putting out new booking links for intro sessions so that I can, quickly meet the needs of everyone who needs me, which is not an insignificant amount of people.
So do you do public speaking too?
I do. I love public speaking. And I have a business manager who is helping me get booked on stages. And I'm finally at a point where I can command a fee. And I'm really thankful to be where I am at this stage in my career because I love speaking. And if I could just create my dream life, it would be talking to survivors and billing for my time. And then doing paid public speaking and consulting for businesses.
And selling your book. Tell us the name of your book
My
again.
book, Outcry Witness. It is a former prosecutor's guide to healing and justice after sexual violence. Got Blair.
Okay, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. You had such great questions. This was a really thought-inspiring discussion.